da 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 da. My good friends, my good friends, my good friends. Do a little bit of everything, everything. Cause it takes a bit of everything, everything. My good friends, my good friends, my good friends. Do a little bit of everything, everything.
All right, I want to give a first start just letting you know what's about ready to happen, about to happen, so that you're aware of like why this is a little different. Those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Ben Regal, and for 7 years I've done a podcast. We've done that with really loud, so I apologize. 7 years I've done a podcast. It's called My Good Friends. I started it probably because I was just wanting to talk about real things in RevCycle. And I always tell people it's the only podcast that we swear about things in RevCycle and like you probably don't want your kids listening to. And I say that because I wanted just to talk about things that were actually happening, but no one seemed to be talking about it publicly. And so we would tackle subjects that most people wouldn't tackle, and then I would interview people like my friends up here, David and Motti, and hear what's actually happening for revenue cycle people. So that was the whole intention. For 6 years I did that, and we're about ready to go to our 7th season, which is crazy. And I do whatever topic I want to do that I find interesting. And then a couple years ago, Central Ohio HFMA, Kayla asked me to do this live, which I was like, this is weird, but okay, we'll do it live. We'll see what it's like in front of an audience. And I'm going to be honest with you, it is weird because we're going to do a conversation and talk. And at the end of the first one I ever did in front of an audience, I had no idea if it was good or not. None. I had like zero idea. Like, I think it was bad. What did people think? And she was like, no, people loved it. It was great. It was like hearing from people real. So we're going to try to do that again, have a conversation about change, which I feel like we've beaten a little bit to death, but we'll try to take a different angle. This will be, we'll talk for 30, 40 minutes as like part of the podcast. And then we're going to actually open up for questions from you. And this is what requires is like active participation. So if you have a question, there's a mic. Tanya's going to have a mic. Well, someone's going to have a mic. And grab a mic, ask a question. I'm sure they'd love to answer. Hopefully it's fun. At least just give us some grace to do it. I don't know. It'll be fun. We'll have a good time. All right. So you guys got your mics on?
I think so.
Okay, cool. All right. And then, okay, we're good? All right. All right, we'll just get started. I think we originally got asked to do change and what was happening with, what were the splinter effects, I think was the name of the title. Splinter effects from the change thing. And if anyone follows my stuff at all knows that I was like very, what's the word I should use?
Passionate?
Passionate about the fact that change was not being forthright about what was actually happening.
United Health
And they
Group
were, what's that?
United Health Group wasn't being.
Yeah, so United was not
There you go.
forthright in telling us what was actually happening. What I could not say publicly, but I could say this now probably, is I had inside people at United telling me what was happening. And so I knew things that they were like saying publicly, but like, privately they were like, they didn't know what was going on. So that was like the first thing. But I think that the thing that I found leaders experiencing for the first time was this feeling of like total out of control. Like they had no control of what was really happening because they didn't really know what was happening. And so it was very interesting to watch that whole process and now to look back and see so much has happened since then. But I also think there's been a number of kind of splinter effects from it. And one is that for a long time, I think people have had this. I know VPs of RevCycle have had this idea of like, I'm going to consolidate to the fewest number of vendors because I can manage them. And then we had people, I did these town halls. You guys were on them. We did some town halls with people right after the change thing happened. And there was several groups on there that had everything with change. Insurance verification, and we don't really remember this, we don't think about it much, but all those systems were down.
Yep.
And so I questioned, like, there's this debate now of like, well, should I consolidate vendors? Or now create duplicative vendors, right? And it's not as simple as that, right? So it's not as simple as like, I just get 2 clearinghouses. Like, how many people really want 2 clearinghouses? Not many, but it did expose the vulnerability. So I'm going to start there. Like, what should we do about vendor consolidation versus like duplicative services or distributing vendors?
Well, I would just start with, I guess, how personally not having one vendor doing everything helped us survive, right? So we had.
And this is when you were at Alina.
So I was Alina Health in Minnesota. We had Change Health was our HB clearinghouse, but we had all of our edits sitting on our server. So at least we had claim edits not lost in total. We had a separate vendor for PB. We had a separate vendor for statements. We had separate vendors for everything else. They were just our main hospital side clearinghouse.
Just by chance, you got lucky.
Just by, well, maybe.
Weren't you going to consolidate those?
We were planning on consolidating, yes. We were.
Like dodged a bullet there, right? You're like,
Big time.
Thank God.
Big time. But
For once, you're like, IT was slow, and that was great.
But it's interesting that you pick on IT, because I think that's what's like now has slowed down even more. So even if I wanted to bring in a new vendor or consolidate or change something, like let's say I have both HB and PB going through one clearinghouse and I want to separate them so that I have redundancy,
Right.
it would take me 2 years, because now everyone's so afraid of the next cyber attack and the next cyber event that until the lawyers get comfortable with the information and the data and IT gets comfortable and everyone's necks are like on the chopping block, if they're going to sign off on it, it's become like the other extreme of now they're afraid to bring in new vendors or change vendors or anything like that.
Even though they changed the clearing, people changed the clearinghouse in like 2 days.
We were on
during
these
that
calls.
period, right?
For the first like 2 weeks, I was on daily calls between various forums, right? Between just HFMA, RCM Leaders Forum. There were just a bunch of forums that were allowing people to get together and just talk about what they were doing. And you're right, half the industry just jumped to different clearinghouses in days, and nobody cared about security, risk, technology, nothing. They were just like, how do we get claims out the door? And half of those people never got claims out the door because they rushed too quickly into a system or into a change that they couldn't get their system to actually work. Mm-hmm. And then a year later, they're still trying to figure it out. So yeah, I think we got lucky that we weren't all consolidated on one system. And lessons learned, I don't want to ever be in that predicament.
I think you asked what people should do. I don't know if there's a one-size-fits-all answer, of course, on vendor consolidation versus not, but I think it's whether you do it with a high level of quantitative analysis or not, I think it changes the calculus of a total cost of ownership calculation, right? Having one end-to-end vendor introduces certain risks, particularly in this cyber landscape. It also introduces customer service risk. If they turn to garbage for some reason, new M&A activity on their side or something like that, you've got risk there, right? But having 17 different systems has risk, because how much are you relying on? Right? Yeah, what are you relying on? So just, I guess the advice would be zooming out and just making sure you're taking the holistic lens to it, and then what fits leadership's personality, the organization's cultural risk tolerance, and just looking at it that way for anybody listening or hears approach, what fits for them. But I think a lot of us have maybe had personal philosophies on driving to consolidation or staying separate, and challenging your own assumptions on that maybe is the point.
Yeah. I mean, the irony here is we were supposed to have a third panelist, Kim, and apparently she had a cybersecurity event with a vendor this morning.
Oh, my God.
That's why she's not here. So it's like, this is a real thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's like we're going to be actively dealing with it. My thing was always with the change thing is I actually think that they just got in somehow. Like they fished and they got in. They don't actually know what they were doing. And my guess is they got to the claims part, like what is all this data? And they just were like, let's just get all this data. The scarier version of that is they actually know what they're doing in the space, or they know rev cycle in some way, and they did the same thing. That's actually the scarier version. The scarier version of they actually knew it, if they knew what they were doing in our world, and were able to get in and know what they're doing on this cyber part. That's the scarier version, actually.
I think our scariest version of all of that is the fact that healthcare is so behind from other industries in general. Like,
Yes.
credit card companies have way more information. Banking companies have way more information that would be more useful if you're just looking for financial gain, right? But they've been in the business of securing their data for way more years than most hospitals or doctors' offices or clinics. We're just easy targets. And I think that's part of the challenge is, because you're right, for the most part, if you're pulling information, let's say it's Epic information or clearinghouse information, to the average person, they have no clue what they're looking at, right? It's just names and numbers.
They didn't know.
Nobody has a clue what it is.
Right.
And then, but once that first person is able to do that, and everyone makes a big deal about it, now everyone knows how easy it is to get to really important information that, like, the world wants to keep secret.
Right. Well, we know for a fact they paid $23 million to the first time. We don't know if they paid more. We don't know if they actually got the data back.
Right.
What pisses me off so much about the situation is that we still don't know. And my friends tease me, they'll send me like, I got my letter. And I'm like, what the letter from Change? That's nice. They're like,
the letters came out
might have happened
7 months later.
Like, that's ridiculous. Yeah. They should know. They should at least know.
There's so much
if they don't get the
legal
data
hedging.
back, they should at least know what's happening.
There's so much legal hedging in that letter. I mean,
Right. It was all maybes.
Yeah, maybe, could have. We, our enterprise, we were getting calls about it. I'm sure you guys were too. Patients like, what did you get hacked? What happened? No, it's nothing to do with us. It's not our fault. We didn't do it. Your information with us is secure. And then I'm sort of off mic, if you will, like, yeah, but your information got hacked. Like,
For sure, your information. But it probably was already. Like, let's be honest, it probably was already. But that's
For sure, right. By the way, the patients would have been easy.
right.
For me, it was like 6,500 employed physicians, all trying to get a hold of me at the same time.
Yeah.
Did our data? Was it our stuff? And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't even think about like the employees of the health system or physicians. We were thinking of, it's like millions of patients. But the reality is this was all personal. And that's when it clicked, like, my stuff's there too.
Mm-hmm.
If you saw a doctor between January and February of 23,
Right.
you were 24, you were absolutely probably affected.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, our self-insured plan, the TP, like, we were lucky, blessed, whatever. We did not have change for a clearinghouse. We had change for statements. So the rev cycle direct impact was minimal. The indirect was decent because the number of payers use it. But our TPA, we discovered, used change for our self. So all of our employees are, what's this about? What's going on? And it not only did it mess with that for them, but it threw a major wrench into cash flows on claims, because we're one of our own biggest customers, right? I'm sure that's true for a lot of systems. If you're self-insured, you're trying to steer everybody back to you.
Right.
So that was an interesting angle on it for us. It was just walking through that.
Right. I want to go back to something you said, Motti, about like it's slowed everything down from an IT perspective. Like, what is happening today if you were to try to get someone approved to be a vendor or whatever it is? Like, what is the process now? And how much different is it now versus before?
So I would say pre-Change Health, let's say it took me an average of 6 months from beginning to end to get a NDA, MSA, statement of work, legal to sign off, IT to sign off. Usually it was a solid 6 months before anything really was happening as far as implementation goes. I would say now it's at least doubled. So now it takes me at least 12 months, because at the 6 month mark, I can have all the legal documentation done. That's when risk picks up, right? IT risk, like there's a whole new area within legal and contracting and supply chain where they're assessing risk. And once that portion starts, it's just a whole new timeline. And it's, at least this is my opinion, it's people who don't know the industry. So you've got all these, new folks that are either part of supply chain or legal or IT, and they've all overnight become experts at data risk. And they don't have a clue of how our information goes from, let's say, Epic to a third-party vendor. They don't know how information goes through clearinghouses, how there may be claim scrubbers that are third parties before the clearinghouse, how information comes back from a payer. They don't understand what we do with the information or with the data, and so they're like learning on the fly. So they're reading agreements, they're doing these risk assessments, they're hiring third parties that are more on the technology risk assessment. Again, they don't understand healthcare part of it, and they're all learning as they're going. And so now, if I needed a vendor, right away on something, let's say a new statement vendor, a new billing vendor, a new something, it would take me a year to onboard them. And that's ridiculous. I mean, health systems can't wait a year to get work started.
But it also prevents your duplicative strategy. If your strategy is to actually create some level of overlap of services, like a second clearinghouse, you actually couldn't get it implemented.
You got to start today if you want it done by next year.
And did either of you do a second clearinghouse?
We're in the process right now.
And how is that going to work? How are you going to keep it active?
The main thing that we're doing is it's really more about having the live contract and having data interfaces sort of ready to go, and less so about using them routinely. So, and I didn't go for best in breed. We used our bank's clearing. We use PNC. They have a clearinghouse. I don't even care if it's any good. They were willing to have a no minimum volume contract. Cool. Let's go. Let's turn it on. So we're engaged in that contract, and we started the kickoff 3 weeks ago on that. So I can't give a ton of detail of how it's going so far, but ultimately it's more about it's on the shelf and ready. And again, I don't really care if it's got all the great widgets and it's got a wonderful UI. It's the backup. It's the backup.
I'm not in the same boat. So I'd prefer to have the parse out, but with the redundancy of the claim edits. Because a lot of the folks that I spoke to post Change Health who quickly turned something else on ended up with 80% of their claims getting denied or paid wrong or processed wrong. That's just triple the amount of work, and it takes,
Brutal.
forever to recover from that.
Yeah.
So what I've been focusing on, because it's just easy to do, is just a PB-HB split and then an ancillary as a third. So home care, pharmacy, hospice, just transportation billing. So now I basically have 3 vendors that all have redundancies on all of the claim editing systems from all 3. They deal with theirs, but I have a contract in place that basically says, I think it's once a quarter we test a file so they can actually pull the rest of it. So,
Yes.
if you don't test it, it's not working until you test it and it works. And then it's our backup plan, I guess, just related for clearinghouses.
But they are taking all 3 of them they're taking a volume through in some sort of fashion on a regular basis.
Yes.
But you're not doing any volume with this.
I mean, minimal. I don't want to say it's going to be 0, but if we've got, because every clearinghouse has some plans that they don't really work with, and so any of those will parse over to the other one, to the bank's clearinghouse. So there will be some, but I don't want to pretend. I wouldn't imagine it's more than 1% of our payer mix based on what we've looked at. So it's tiny. So we run some. Go back to the risk question, right? We run the risk of edits aren't going to fire and things like that. But when I look at what I could get live, what I could get economically, that's what I've got at a small community hospital. I don't know if I got the book of business. I really like that idea about splitting it out. I don't know if I could get it done.
Right.
Certainly costing you more regardless.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Either way you're doing it, it's costing you more.
But again, I think a lot of it is dependent on the size of the health system, right? So one of the things I learned from Change Health, but I had already started that years ago, was creating a vendor management team within RevCycle, right? I used to, I think this happened to me about 8 years ago. My first time I was an AVP in a CBO, and through the invoice processes, approving invoices, and no one knew what the invoices were for. And I'm like, what do you mean? And we had like a whole bunch of work happening, and some of those invoices were contracts that were signed evergreen forever, and we're getting charged monthly, and no one really knew what these invoices were for, and people are just signing them. And it wasn't until I grabbed a bunch of people and said, okay, can someone explain to me why we have 4 different vendors that do patient statements? And we found out that one of the vendors hasn't done a single patient statement for us in like 3 or 4 years, but they were still on a evergreen run rate of like some sort of minimum amount, and we were paying them. And so I created that team, and that team actually helped with understanding how not to consolidate. Because now I had people who were rev cycle focused. I took like a couple of supervisors and some like key staff members and like repurposed them. And one of the big things was now that when the questions came back from some of these vendors, I actually had people who can answer it. And when the invoices came in, I had people who understood what they were looking at. And so the vendor management team really helped maneuver around, you know, how quickly should we react to the fact that Change Health is down, right? Well, I need people to answer questions of like, what's our involvement, what's our risk, how long it's going to be. And it was the vendor management folks who were like, okay, we've got PB covered, but within PB, we didn't know that 4 payers were using Change Health. And so that came out right away through that process. And then like a week later, you know, Change Health through their thing is like, oh, by the way, and they started like leaking that slowly. It wasn't just a provider problem, it was the payers as well.
Right.
Well, I definitely want to talk about this because this was another thing I lost my mind over, because you actually, the first list, comprehensive list we could get actually came from Experian. Remember this?
Yep.
Like, it didn't come from Change, it came from Experian. And then it was the first time I'd ever heard that, like, was it Aetna? I think Aetna, most of Aetna's claims are exclusively going through this.
Yep.
So, like, how is that possible that a payer could only adjudicate through one means, right? Like, it almost doesn't make any sense. And then you find out that I found out later that Anthem has the same thing with Availity, which again I didn't know. I feel like I should have known, but then I was like, this isn't public knowledge, right? They don't produce lists of like what the payers are doing.
Not only is it not public knowledge, but the way that it came out was because both Experian and Availity were fighting for the business. They were like looking to get in front of any provider they can to say, we have an alternative for you.
We're still live.
And, right, we're still live.
running.
But even we're still live means they have challenges with their own payers or some of the payers that they can't link to, because even they were using Change Health for some portals or data sources and things like that. But for someone who, let's say, didn't want to consolidate, if they would have signed up right away for, let's say, Availity, what you've done is put all your eggs in one basket again.
For sure, right.
And so
But even outside of our control, though, it's already happening to us whether we like it or not.
Right.
Because they're doing it, and they don't even have to tell you they're doing it.
Yeah, it's the inverse of us. It's the inverse of the conversation we just had about whether we should consolidate, you know, to one. But they're doing what they can to consolidate to either get the best cost or the best function or whatever they think from, you know, some version of me is sitting at a plan, right, trying to figure out, oh, how do we get the claims processing cost down while doing other things that they might be doing in shadowed rooms about debating how to process claims.
That doesn't happen.
We won't speak to that. My legal defense fund is not topped up, so we won't make any allegations.
That's right.
But I think it's just natural. It's just the inverse of what we're talking about. But ultimately, that's fully out of your control. The only thing maybe that you could do, I guess, is if you were doing some sort of risk assessment, you could try to look at your payer mix and spread your risk out. And maybe if you were, let's say you were going to rebid your clearinghouse, do you go to the one? Do you make that a factor in your decision making about which? I don't know.
What? But isn't even in, like, maybe if you took a step back on negotiating with, when you get to the negotiation table with a payer, isn't there a piece of this where it's like demanding that you have A, visibility to it, and B, what is your backup plan? People keep asking about what our backup plan
Did
is.
you just say demand something from a payer?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an oxymoron, but I mean, like, you could still demand or sue to know, like, what's happening or what is your backup plan. So, like, what's your contingency plan when this happens? Because my guess is no one's really ever had that conversation.
Now, a quick word from our sponsor. Are you a healthcare organization in California, Washington, Idaho, Western New York, or Eastern Pennsylvania? If you are, there is a good chance you may be leaving money on the table with your Blue Cross Blue Shield plans. The reason? Within these areas, there exist multiple Blue Cross Blue Shield licensees with overlapping territories. Healthcare providers in these areas have the ability to maximize their revenue for out-of-state or out-of-area Blue Card plans by directionally billing the local plan offering a higher allowable amount. Switch RCM leverages proprietary software that employs predictive analytics to assess discrepancies in contractual reimbursement rates and identify which Blue plan offers higher reimbursement. Switch subsequently will direct the initial claims to the Blue payer with the higher negotiated reimbursement rate. This results in significant reimbursement improvements to providers. And because Switch RCM performs this work pre-bill, it eliminates the need to void and rebill claims, ultimately reducing time and expense. Go to switchrcm.com for more information. Now back to the show.
I've never heard a payer talk about it.
They're not going to be open to
And they're
it.
not going to be open, but I just think, like, do we start forcing it that way to make sure that it's not, so at least you know what you're getting up to, and, like, you know, like, okay, Aetna, if this happens again, like, what are you actually going to do here?
Well, so I use relationships in order to find that information out. Because what we did is I called basically all of our big payers and said, I need you to keep funneling cash. Like, you know that we have your patients. You know exactly how much you pay us every month. It doesn't, there's a plus or minus of a few percentage points, but for the most part, most of the big payers, they know their run rate when it comes to large health systems. And I was just asking for continuation of that. And then I was asking for, like, what do you see on your side?
But they paid you?
Some did, yes.
They paid you advances?
Yeah.
Some did,
Some did.
not Change.
No, United did.
United did. But
Yeah.
you were like, you have a lot of United.
I have a
right?
lot of United,
Okay.
yes. But United did, Blue Cross did, Aetna did not, but Aetna couldn't. Because not only was their claim system part of Change, their check run process was part of the same system.
Right.
So they couldn't even adjudicate a check if you wanted.
Send them paper checks,
Like,
like
yeah,
handwritten paper
handwritten
checks.
checks.
So, like,
There were
some
people I
back
spoke
office.
to at Change that were talking about the fact that, like, their laptops, like, couldn't get opened, and
Oh no, none of them could access.
none of them could have to,
Yeah.
right. But some of the people who work at United Health Group relied on some of the information on those laptops to do other functions, like approving check runs.
Right.
And so now your check run system's not working. But there's no payer that came out and said, highlights of the news, right? They talked about Change Health. They talked about the problems, although it was very cryptic to most audiences. And then nobody else came forward and said, oh, by the way, like, this affected us in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually, what you just described actually paints the picture that the problem we're in is a big health system is going to have power to do something. David's health system is
I'm
not
sitting
going to
here
have the
thinking
same.
about-
It's not going to
yeah.
have the opposite effect. A physician office is not going to have that ability.
Right.
And my thing with the whole time was, this was probably my complaint about, like, AHA was going after, like, oh, we should get rid of pre-certificate or pre-authorizations. I'm like, guys, that is not the problem. The problem is, like, the smaller facilities and the physician officer are going to run out of money.
Yeah.
Health systems can, like, manage it. They have funds. They're large, much, much larger. Like, if you're a $4 billion health system, you can probably manage it. It sucks, but, like, you can do it. If you're Mary Rutan and you only have 50 days of cash and you don't, and you're lucky you didn't get it fully affected, right?
Oh,
But, like,
absolutely.
you still got affected 20 to 30%. If you're another health system or a physician office and you can't sustain, that's what I think was the biggest miss and probably the crime here. It was like they were offering, United was offering I guess, what Optum changes offering like cash advances on, but it was only associated with United patients. It wasn't
Right.
associated with the total.
The total
It
book
wasn't
of
enough to
business.
cover operations. So the fact that you could call makes sense, right?
Right. So
You
I
have a
called that
relationship,
none,
you
I
have-
called
but you have
Blue, and I called
not just
each one.
relationship, you have authority because you're at a big place.
Right. Yes.
If you don't have that, you're screwed.
Agreed.
I don't see how you
Not-
get around it.
Not
Like, I
only
don't see how
that,
you
but
get around
the larger health systems, right? So now I'm at Sutter Health. You're talking about 18 billion, right? The even larger health systems have the direct phone call to the CEOs of some of these
it. Right.
payers,
Right.
where if we needed to float for whatever reason, even if it was a problem on our side, it's a different conversation. Where, yeah, if you're sitting at a smaller health system, or when we were doing, these phone calls post Change Health, the disparity between the different sizes of the health systems and how people were dealing with it were very different, right? My CFO came to me and said, "What should we do?" And I basically answered saying, "For now, sit and wait. Like, we have enough cash on hand, we can survive. Like, we'll wait a second." And then I know plenty of colleagues who their CFOs came to them and said, like, if we don't get claims out in the next 3 or 4 weeks, there's no payroll in 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different decision-making process and strategy on how you deal with this.
Right. I don't know. I don't have an answer there, but
I think you're correct that if we can ask for it during contracting, anything you can get, you should get, to try to help mitigate the impact, not if, but when a cyber attack happens to you, because it's coming for all of us, sadly.
I gotta imagine payers are.
But they're not
going to
wanna-
too, just like we are.
Yeah, but they win financially if they're down for they win during that period of time.
Yeah.
To an
'Cause they're
extent.
just holding money. Right?
Yeah, they're just holding the money,
But it's not just cyber attacks. I think that some of the things I'm seeing now is you've got some pretty big payers across the country who are on really old platforms. Cyber attack or not, at some point in time, systems are going down. And if they go down for an hour, okay, we can handle it. They go down for a day, okay. What happens if, like, I don't know, Aetna's main claim system goes down for a month? Not cyber attack, just technology down.
Right.
Right? And they're like rebuilding stuff behind. The Blue Crosses, there's lots of them across the country that are on platforms where they don't even know why their system's still up. Like they were supposed to change them a while ago, and some of those systems are just miracles that they're still processing claims.
Yeah, I
Well,
think our go ahead.
I was going to say we're here in Indiana, but Ohio had a version of that. 23, they went to sort of a central clearinghouse for Medicaid, which of course didn't work the first
Shocker.
several months. So there's no claims. Nothing's getting processed. Nobody the MCOs don't know where the claim is. Have they received the claim? Have they not? So we had exactly what you're talking about. It's not even some cyber attack. It's just somebody flipped a switch to go live. It wasn't really ready, and now it's broken. And what do you do about it? So, because there was no reset button at that point in time, and it took months. It took months.
I think we always have this idea that every payer we talk to is just more technologically advanced than we are, but not always true, right?
Yeah.
Like some of these systems are old, and they've also bought up things, so they have multiple systems,
True.
not just one system. It's much more complicated than we like to think it is. I think maybe I'm wrong, but
No, I think you're 100% right. Again, so like United Healthcare, and we'll call it the Blues, right? Those are the two mammoth health systems, health payers that are now also doing other things, like providing care, processing authorizations, processing claims. Like they're doing a lot more than just simply insurance, billing, and payments,
Right.
yeah.
right? They're in the world of involvement in providing care. You can't provide care to those patients without some sort of link to third-party systems that they now own. And yeah, those are all the same risks, whether it's cybersecurity or not.
Right.
We're sitting with these risks. And it's just interesting, like as an industry, everything about transparency and everything about security came to the providers first. And we scrambled and did all this work, and none of it exists at the payer level to the same scrutiny level.
Well, with the risk of going down a topic trail that will be not received well, I'd like to talk about kind of the change thing, and then when UHC CEO got murdered in New York. I think it's fascinating to watch kind of the vitriol. Like, I didn't expect how much you would see, but I also didn't expect this. Both my daughters are teenagers; they're 15 and 16, and their perception, and this is a real conversation I had with them, was, and their classmates would say the same thing, that Luigi Mangione was like a hero, like a cult hero. This is actually what's happening, just so we're on the same page. And I couldn't believe my ears that A, they would even know who that was, B, like that they even know who it was and what happened, and B, that it would be something that would be someone they would see in a positive light, like as if they've, in fact, they had a thing was like free man, whatever, free is, that was like a saying, as I still cannot believe, by the way. And I was like, whoa, like back up, like that's, I don't think you're catching it right. But I also think from that there seemed to be a lot of like almost like, is this a tipping point for enough people angry about the system, and especially angry at like United. But then the corollary was recently United CEO, or the UHD CEO, actually doubling down on we're doing things the right way, everything else is broken, which I still find fascinating that they would go that approach, but I don't know. I'd be curious to know what your guys' takes on it, because I don't.
I mean, it's an act of murder and vigilantism. But the root, besides the potential for just raw mental instability, is which is unforgivable. Because we can't have that, or we don't have a civilization.
Right.
But people have been harmed by these organizations, and there don't seem to be getting, just based on the finger on the pulse of the populace, to your point, don't seem to be getting relief from the spending, the dollar, because either their employer just sticks with it. Like, no employer seemed to have turned away from these plans doing this, these behaviors that are harming patients. They don't seem to be getting relief from the ballot box, because neither the blue nor red team seems to really be meaningfully willing to rein in this behavior. And the court penalties, the jury box, doesn't seem to be high enough to disincentivize bad behavior. Well, when you've run through, the soapbox of voting with your dollars, the ballot box of voting with your votes, and the jury box of the courts, it's in our founding documents that the next step is the ammo box. Like, our founding fathers talked about this. So we should probably do something about it, because I don't want more of this, because it's not okay. That's I've thought a lot about this for the last couple months. So I don't know. I might get some hate mail for that, but
I think it's a very scary discussion. I think that the reality is most people don't understand what goes into some of these policies that are being made. Somewhere along the line, the system broke, because the system itself used to be patient-driven, and now it is employer-driven. So if an employer speaks to an insurance plan and wants something set up so that they're not spending a lot of money, but covering their employees, because they want their employees to have some sort of benefit structure, and everybody knows already, like, it's getting out of hand, right? The patient responsibilities are through the roof. The nuances of actually being able to access care are extremely difficult. But from an employer and an insurance company side, they sort of try to stay uninvolved.
Right.
And so I think United Healthcare's approach of like doubling down on their policies and doubling down on we're doing the right thing is because they don't have a choice. Their alternative is to say, wait, the system is broken, we got to start from scratch.
Which they won't do.
There's no way.
What's fascinating is I did this post in December on LinkedIn. Some of you may have seen it. Doesn't matter. It was Mark Cuban talking about hospitals being subprime lenders.
You even got him to reply.
I did. I did get Mark Cuban to reply. So it was cool. But what I learned the most about this post got 750,000 views and 370 comments. And when you reach a certain level on any social media platform, I've learned you get crazy people, like crazy comments. I actually had to delete a few because they were insane and not appropriate, but that's a whole other side. What the most interesting thing was that I learned of everyone's comments and questions was they do not understand how anything works. So they constantly confusing charges with reality. And I'm like, charges are irrelevant. And I'm trying to explain it, and like no one got it right. And so, but I did find it fascinating. It was like the blame being kind of placed on both hospitals and payers. I get there's blame to go around, but it was fascinating to feel like people don't really understand how the system even works.
Right.
So it is not surprising in a way that there's this kind of like vitriol towards United, but also that like hospitals are somewhat being lumped into the same category.
Right.
Because no one really understands how it even works. They just know it costs a lot and it's not great service. Right?
They also know that they're getting a phone call from someone on my staff from like pre-reg, who's saying we're going to delay or cancel your service because your insurance company didn't approve it, or because your
or I got this bill and it was 10,000.
Right?
And I was only in the ER for a minute. Like, what happened?
So for whatever reason, like the patients that are aware of what the providers control, because of that, I think that's their first line of saying, wait, who do I blame? Right? They're not going to blame their employer. They don't know to, and they don't understand the concept of like going to their benefit, administrator to try to figure that part out.
Yes.
But they can for sure blame their provider. They see their provider. They can have that conversation with someone at the provider's office. They can usually get a hold of them quicker. They see them more often. No one ever sees a United Healthcare utilization management rep.
It's an enigma.
Right.
It doesn't actually exist.
So the only tangible connection to most people is their providers.
Right.
And meanwhile, we're the ones that are just following whatever policies the payers are lining up for us.
Now, a quick word from our sponsor. Physician billing underpayments pose a significant challenge for providers. Significant claim volume, low reimbursement, and the complexity and number of contracts means health systems often don't dedicate the time, resources, or technology to identify these opportunities. These needles in the haystack are difficult to locate without scalable, comprehensive technology. Switch RCM's intelligence platform addresses this challenge by identifying payment pattern variances at scale. By aggregating 100% of your 835 and 837 data, they uncover hidden insights and trends, enabling you to tackle underpayment opportunities and mitigate risks before they escalate into larger issues. Their algorithms both identify underpayments and also provide the ability to instantly categorize underpayment issues. This ensures you spend less time trying to connect the dots between all your issues and more time submitting accurate and consistent listings to payers, ultimately translating into quicker resolution and payment. Go to switchrcm.com for more information. Now back to the show.
All right. I think we're somewhat out of time. I did want to open up for questions from the audience. We do have a live audience, so if there were questions from anyone or a comment.
I just hope they're all still awake.
We do need a microphone, though, so we need to get
Tasha's
you the
got one.
microphone. That would be great.
And you have to repeat the question so it gets onto the podcast.
Oh, no, it should be able to, I think.
There's a question mainly for maybe David and Motti. I mean, a lot of health systems have addressed their risk after the change, the clearinghouse issue, by having redundancy. Okay, you've got your claim edits and maybe bridge routines saved in multiple places, and maybe a lot of people switch vendors. But I think still today, there are payers who have exclusive connectivity to Change Healthcare only. Care First is one. There's a bunch of them. Who should bring that conversation of pressure, is your presumption, well, the vendors should be talking to them, or should the payers? Because if that's not occurring yet, and that's a big part of risk mitigating, is having a change, or hey care first. You've got to have more than one way to get to you, whether it's FinThrive or Experian or whoever it is, you've got to have more than one way to get to you in case it happens. So are you addressing that? Do you think it's the providers who should be pressing those single source connectivity payers?
My initial response is, as someone who works for the provider, we're the only ones that can do it because no one else cares. So I think I partnered with my managed care contracting folks, and that's really where we start, right? It's more of putting language in the agreements, and you have to have teeth. And so this is where it does help to be maybe either part of a larger cohort or a hospital association of a state, things like that. But you get something in there that basically holds them accountable to what happens if, right? They're not going to change. Your smaller health plans that are using Change Health are not changing, right? They're keeping their clearinghouse. But maybe there's language. So one of the things I put in is I added language in almost all of my contracts that says something like, if you pay me $1 million a month and something happens to the connectivity, I expect to still get $1 million a month. And they're signing on that
And that's the
as a
language.
risk.
That's the language we should really be focusing on.
And that's,
Right.
I think that's the language. The language is for the most part, unless it's like one of these payers that deals with like 3 patients a year, for the most part, you know approximately every year what each payer pays you, and then there's a plus or minus depending on some data. But get that in the language of your agreements. That's your best bet.
I agree.
Is to add language and to protect yourself.
I would agree, and there'd be very minimal that I would add, except obviously if you don't have the negotiating power to just get what you can. Even if you can't get, if your average is $1 million, but you can only get a guarantee of take the $200,000. Just take whatever you could get if you're just a price taker.
Other questions, thoughts, comments? Something we said you hated or liked, I don't know. We'll take either.
Would be interested in your perspective on what's next. We have the payers doubling down on their necessity and even benefit in this system. Hospital margins are eroding, and now you have public outcry that the system isn't working. Are we at a tipping point? Do you see a tipping point? What do you see in the future?
Who wants to take it?
I'll tell you what I've been doing. Just and this goes for Allina Health in Minnesota and now Sutter Health in California. As a chief revenue cycle officer, I had never spoken to employers before, and now I'm having conversations with the people that are writing the benefit plans for the large employers. To me, the tipping point has happened already. The fact that I'm speaking to I don't know, even some of the government, large government employers, I'm speaking to these different benefit responsible parties and talking to them directly now about how to mitigate risk, how to mitigate challenges associated to timeliness of concurrent reviews. I have patients that are coming into our EDs after they've been at other emergency departments or they were hospitalized somewhere else, and now they're coming up for a secondary level of care. And I have insurance plans, large and small, throughout the state of California that are just basically ignoring the first 3 or 4 days of our requests. And so, so we're trying to get this information, we're trying to get the patient involved, but there's so much that has to be, ticked and tied in order to get paid correctly and in order to make sure that the patient doesn't get left with a big bill, that I'm going directly now to the employers because the payers are not helping.
Yeah. The group that has the most amount of all the groups associated with everything we're talking about, employers have the biggest impact on change that could happen. I fully believe that. Because most of the large employers are self-insured. They're already paying for it out of pocket already. And what I think people are realizing is that big payers have become banks. That's all they are. If I hold money long enough, and by the way, I'm holding that employer's money, and if I hold it long enough, I can get interest on it, and that's how I actually make money. And I think Cuban actually outlaid this very well in his blog that he did. So if you haven't checked it out, it's worthwhile. Not everything in there is good, but just there's some things that are really good. And I think this is one in that he's nailed, because as soon as you layer any administrative burden on anything, it's 30% additional cost.
Yep.
So, and if I'm an employer, why am I giving power over to the insurance company to decide what's good for my employees? Like, I don't know why anyone's doing that at this point. But they think it's complicated. But there was a study that HFMA just did a peer review on that Vanderbilt did direct with the employer, and it's fascinating, and proving basically they took out a ton of cost. So I do think that that's one thing that you're going to start seeing happen. I 100% believe employers are the only way things happen. So when you say, is there a tipping point? I actually don't think that there will be. Like, there's not enough. There's too many interested parties that have too many varying views that have a lot to lose. And so ultimately, I don't think public opinion will get it over the finish line. I actually don't. Now, I do think one thing I see happening, and I think in 25 and 26 will happen more and more, is I see health systems suing payers during contracting. And I see it happening, and it's going to be happening a lot more. And if you're not doing the strategy right now, you probably will be. And again, I told you I gather a group twice a year. That was the number one thing people came away with from that group. Of 40 of the largest health systems in the U.S., they were all going to be suing their payer during the contracting. And then probably one payer in particular. Because it works, because it absolutely works. Yeah. But that's not sustainable, right? Like, eventually that won't be sustainable. But I do think that I see it.
I actually think suing payers have become a step of normal revenue cycle. We'll bill, we'll collect, we'll appeal denials, and at some point in time, we just disagree, and the only way to take it seriously with the payer is to file a suit.
It's a suit.
Arbitration, something. And that's just, that is now part of normal revenue cycle. If it's not, it will be soon.
Yeah. That's what Mercy did. Mercy took $150 million, some total of things that they said were denied. We appealed, you should have paid, or delayed, and they took it to court, and immediately they responded, and they settled. Immediate. It wasn't even like a question. But prior to that, they wouldn't come to the table.
Yep. I'd like to come back to Nick's question about the tipping point, because I do have a slightly different take, I think. Not dramatically different, but slightly different. I don't think there's there's tons of public outrage. I don't know if there's the political will. I mean, we heard from the session this morning for listeners about, the incoming likely legislative agenda of the new administration and the new Congress and so forth and so on, and none of it had anything to do about really reining in plans. So I agree that I don't think that's there. And so it's on us to try to get what we can in the contracts. It's on us to go through the legal steps and then to roll up together what something each of you said is about the direct to the employer. If health systems have been engaging with local employers, RevCycle in the past has not been involved. And you talked about how ignorant everybody was in the comments section, right? We met with the city in our local community. They were changing plans. They got a 40% rate hike from United. We slapped together a plan, a self-funded plan with a TPA with them real fast to give a good deal, and they're all very happy now. And they saved, not only did they not have a 40% increase, they saved money. So it's not quite a direct contract, but it's a wonderful result for all parties. But half the meeting that I had with them, where I was blessed to be in the room, was me educating their HR department about why these plans are bad for their members, for their employees. They're bad for us. They're bad for the local community. And so it's not only, because they're like, this seems too good to be true. How can you do this? I said, because we've got a TPA who's not going to deny 40% of my claims, and make me fight for it. And that administrative burden savings, we can get back to you. And so just figuring out how you can be part of outreach that your health system's doing. If you're in RevCycle in here, reach out to your outreach departments and talk to them about, hey, are we doing any You need to be in the room because Tom or Susie, the HR lady at the local big employer, for the most part, this has been on autopilot for 20 years. I guarantee it. And now it can't be because they can't afford it anymore. So
40 years. But
well, yeah, sure. And then the other thing is, I do think that market pressures on employment got us into this in the Second World War, with wage caps. And then so employers started offering fringe benefits, and that's how we got tied to employer-funded health care. The great retirement of baby boomers out of the workforce is going to create an enormous talent shortage in almost every profession over the next 10 to 15 years. And I think that it is possible that the tipping point is not political will. It's market pressures on the workers saying, I don't want a $15,000 deductible. I'm not coming to work for you. And then HR's got to figure it out. So we need to be in that room when they're trying to figure it out.
I don't disagree.
It's a lot of education.
A lot of education.
I agree. Great question, Nick. Anyone else? Brave soul? No one? No one in the back there?
No, I think mine's more of just a comment. It's interesting hearing you guys talk about this because I have a buddy that works at Elements, and my friend and I just talked about how insurance companies, they're just not paying high-dollar claims. They want to review them multiple times and deny them multiple times, and he kind of came back at me and said, "Oh heck, we'd love to pay all these claims. It's just the pressure from the employers that they paired with." And so kind of hearing you guys talk about that as well kind of allowed me to view it from a different perspective and understand that. And so then I actually went and kind of did a little research and looked at Elevence's operating margin, right? I was thinking, oh gosh, they made $6 billion last year. It's going to be something super large, and it was like 4%. And so just kind of understanding, okay, maybe they are making a lot of money, but from an actual margin perspective, it's not nearly what I was really expecting it to be compared to kind of how they're affecting our side of the business from a provider perspective. So I just wanted to say, I appreciate the comments and the things that you guys have said, and wanted to throw that out there. It's like they are making a lot of money, but from a margin perspective, I would say it's not that much different than where we were at probably prior to COVID. Obviously, we're still having some issues trying to get back to those margin percentages, but I just appreciate the comments you guys had.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I do think there's other things that go into that number that's compensation-wise that I think is a little different, but I do know what you're saying. They aren't making 20%. They aren't. But it also kind of, I think, points to it's not really working on either side as much as we'd like to think it is. But there's just enough to lose. I think that's where I say there's enough to lose on both sides that no one wants to give up anything.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. And inherently, which also I said in the post around UHC CEO being killed, is it's not that these are bad people. These are good people. He was a good person. He was just trying to do a job, right? These people are just trying to do their own jobs. You guys know payers. Most of the people you meet are nice. It's a system that is not working the way we'd like it to work. I think that's probably, make sure that's the point we get across. Any other questions, or should we wrap? Anything else? Great. Well, I hope people found it great. Thanks, guys, for participating.
Thank you for having
Thanks,
us.
Ben.
Good
Thanks,
conversation.
HFMA.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
My good friends, my good friends, my good friends. Do a little bit of everything, 'cause it takes a bit of everything. My good friends, my good friends.